Hi, welcome back to Cloak of Obscurity. Before I get started and finishing up chapter 10, I had a couple things to say. My son asked me a question last week and left me thinking about it. He said, "Mom, if you're trying to make money selling these books, why are you giving it away for free? Why are you reading it on YouTube?" And thinking about it, it's because the important thing isn't money. So if it was about making money, I would have stopped doing this years ago. I'm not, for whatever reason, this is not a commercial endeavor or a big commercial success. It's just something I do because I love doing it, because there's a handful of people who want to know what happens next, and I'm at the top of that list. I want to know what happens to these characters, so I'm going to keep working on these stories for the rest of my life, and hopefully I'll figure out how to get these people out of the messes I'm planning to get them into. Not that I wouldn't like to make money on it. My books are all available on Amazon.com. Just look up Angela P. Wade and you'll find me. But in these, what they call trying times, in other words, the world is actually behaving the way the world tends to behave, as opposed to acting like a television commercial. Well, not a lot of us have a lot of money, so hey, just enjoy listening to me read, and hang in there and have a good day. All right, Zarmina and I are ready to get started. Kitty, kitty. Kitty, kitty. That's Zarmina, my little assistant back there. I always make sure she's here so that at least one person listens to me read. And we left off in chapter 10. And Eddie had just had a rather disturbing vision of Allison Tanner flinging herself into the water. And then he passed out. Hey, are you all right? A hand was shaking my shoulder. I gasped and drew a breath. Are you all right? The voice asked again. I opened my eyes. I was on dry land. I had never left the cliff. I shook my head to clear it. What happened? The man asked. I recognized him as the man who'd thrown a jug at me. His lover was hanging back at the edge of the clearing, covering her face with her veil. You were having some kind of fit, he said. I stammered. A spell, The young man kicked my still smoldering incense into the sea. Stay away from that elf shit, man. It'll rot your brains. Yeah? I said. Come on, the girl said. He's all right. We've got to go. I'll be missed. I could see the ring on the hand she hit her face with. I think you saved my life, I said to the man. Don't mention it, he said, and disappeared into the thickets with his lover. I remained on the ground, staring at Allison's ring, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. The guards at the gate of Castle Belcamp looked at me skeptically. I must speak to Duke Cyprian and Lord Gabriel, I repeated. A young man's life depends on it. And you would be... one of the guards asked, in a tone that implied he really didn't care. My name is Edward Redmage, I said. The Duke knows me. Just send someone to tell him I'm here. If he doesn't want to see me, he can order me to leave. I folded my arms across my chest and stood, unmoving, before the gate. After a while, the guards realized I wasn't going anywhere and sent the youngest and smallest of their number scampering off to find the Duke. I smiled at the guards and, leaning against the castle wall, settled down to wait. Eventually, the young guard came back and whispered something to his superior, who shrugged his shoulders and beckoned me to come in the gate. He escorted me across the castle's outer yard, through the gate of the inner wall, and through the courtyard to the door of the castle itself. I had not been inside these walls since childhood. They did not, however, seem smaller. I was just as intimidated now as I'd been back then. The guard captain took me up a flight of narrow stone stairs to a suite of private apartments in one of the castle's 5 towers. I suppose they were the Duke's room, as he was sitting at a table next to the fireplace finishing his supper. He rose to greet me. A well-rounded older woman, with her hands heavily jeweled and her hair veiled, murmured something pleasant and unintelligible and glided from the room. "Well, young Edward," the Duke said, coming forward to shake my hand, "what can we do for you? I assume this has something to do with that milk-faced cobbler's son we've got locked up squealing in jail." "Your Grace," I said, bowing, "I have new evidence in the case, but I wasn't sure how to explain. I found it through magic. I would rather your Grace not have to take my word alone. If Lord Gabriel, he's supposed to have joined us already. I imagine he's hobbling along. He's older than dirt, you know. I think he was there when the saints voted on dirt. Probably still thinks it's a bad idea. I may be old, but I'm not deaf," Lord Gabriel said from the doorway. I noticed as he entered the room that although he bore a staff, he did not lean on it. He seemed unchanged from when I was a child, rail-thin, bald, white-bearded, and wizened as a raisin. I wondered just how old he really was. "Duke Cyprian," Gabriel continued with a twinkle in his eye, "you should know by now not to mock a man of my powers. Take care. You may wake up one morning to find you've been transformed into a swine." "Huh. Too late," the Duke said, grinning and slapping his broad paunch. "Indeed," Lord Gabriel said. He turned to me. "Greetings, Edward Redmage. It's quite the pleasure to see you, though the circumstances could be better. What is it you have to say to us? I'm quite curious, and I'm sure my old friend here is too, if he can manage to tear himself away from the trough to speak to you." The Duke made squealing sounds and then laughed. "Gentlemen, I found the missing silver ring. The one that belonged to Allison Tanner." "Really?" Gabriel said. "Where was it?" Cyprian asked. Hanging from a bush on the cliffs of the Bell, your Grace," I said. "Once I found it, I used it as the focus point of a divination spell, and well, I really don't feel I should ask you to take my word on such a matter. Perhaps if Lord Gabriel were to try it." "Oh, I trust you implicitly," Lord Gabriel said, putting a bony hand on my shoulder. "But if you think I should have a look at this thing myself, my rooms are in the East Tower. Come along, Cyprian." At this moment, a servant bearing a covered tray entered the room. "Your Grace," he said, bowing to the Duke. "Oh, curse it," the Duke said. "I set it on the table." Now, Cyprian," the wizard said with a faint smile, "your pudding will still be here when you get back." "Yes," the Duke growled, "but it will be cold." "I like mine cold," the wizard said, setting off purposefully down the stairs, his staff clicking on the stones. I followed at his shoulder, and the Duke followed me. "Personally, I think that's the only way rice pudding should be served. Cold." Gabriel continued. "But you non-magic types, you have yet to discover the joys of having a bit of ice around. Edward," he said to me, "have you ever tried cold beer? I mean, really ice-cold beer on a hot day like today?" "No, my lord, I can't say that I have." "Well, you should," he said, coming to the foot of the stairs and striding on down the corridor. "It's the most refreshing thing in the world." take your word for it, I said. Silly old geezer, the Duke mumbled as he lumbered up behind me, watering down his beer with ice. I heard that, called Gabriel over his shoulder. You don't put the ice in the beer, you great lummox. You set the beer pitcher in the ice. We had to hurry to keep up with him. Whatever his age, he was definitely spry. You know, Edward, Lord Gabriel said, I'm really rather sorry that I didn't have the pleasure of training you myself. Your Master Wulfric must count himself quite fortunate to have a pupil like you. I'll take that as a compliment, my lord, I said. We had paused on a landing halfway up the east tower, waiting for Duke Cyprian to catch up with us. It was meant as one. You're one of the most talented young wizards I've ever met. My lord, I said, blushing, not to contradict you, but surely my cousin is clever enough in his way, Gabriel said, but he hasn't got your gift. You're a natural, Edward. It just comes to you. He paused and called down the stairs. Come along, Cyprian, or do you need some fellows with a block and tackle to hoist you up? Gabriel turned to me. My friend is not so fit as he used to be. Believe it or not, I can remember a time when he used to be able to bend over and put on his own boots without straining. The fat Duke rounded the turn of the stairs, puffing and blowing. Well, Gabriel, I'd like to be able to say I remember a time when you had hair, but I don't think there's anyone in the kingdom that old, saving tortoises. Ah, but you're forgetting, the wizard said. I was taught by Lord Kylene, Dragonson of the Mountains, and he was already old then. Gabriel resumed climbing the stairs. And he can still get up a staircase faster than you. I tried not to stare too greedily at all the miraculous books and artifacts cramming the shelves in Lord Gabriel's study. I think I'd have been willing to stay on bread and water for a month for just a chance to get a good look at them all. Now, let me see that ring, the wizard said. I pulled it from my bag and handed it to him. I think I will take your advice, Edward, and check this thing over for myself. He disappeared behind a heavy velvet curtain on the far side of the room. This may take a few minutes, he added as he went. Just make yourself comfortable. I was concerned that the spell might pose a danger to the old man, but was afraid to say anything for fear of insulting him. Duke Cyprian must have read my expression, because he said, Oh, don't worry about old Gabe. He's indestructible. The Duke settled down to wait on a velvet-draped couch that creaked ominously every time he moved, and I perched myself nervously on a stool. Small wisps of foul-smelling smoke curled out from beneath the curtain, letting us know that Gabriel was casting his spell. Time passed. I began to worry, and Cyprian began to grumble good-naturedly about the dinner he'd been torn away from. Finally, the curtains rustled, and Lord Gabriel emerged, the ring in his hand and a look of deep concern on his face. You were right to bring this to me, Edward Redmage, he said, frowning. The cobbler's son is innocent. Alison Tanner took her own life. What? The Duke exclaimed, nearly rolling off the couch. Wait a minute. Where did that come from? From this, Gabriel said, holding out the ring. I performed a spell similar to the one Edward must have, and I assume he saw what I did. A vision of the girl throwing herself from the cliff. Yes, my lord, I said, that is what I saw. So why didn't you tell us in the first place? The Duke asked. Because he didn't want to prejudice my thoughts before I cast the spell, Lord Gabriel said, as though it should have been obvious. In other words, the Duke said, since you both saw the same thing, each without knowing beforehand what you would see, that makes the vision true? Precisely, the wizard said. You catch on quickly. You aren't as slow as you look. But that doesn't explain why, the Duke said. Why what? Lord Gabriel asked. Why she killed herself? The Duke said. It makes no sense. She was young, beautiful, in love, the heir to a good business. Why would she take her own life? I'd been thinking the same thing, but in the presence of my betters had held my tongue. Suicide never makes sense, Lord Gabriel said. It is the final symptom of a fatal disease of the brain. Obviously, young Allison suffered from severe melancholy, an imbalance in bodily humors affecting the mind. The old man sighed. It is a terrible pity that she did not turn to anyone for help. There were herbs and potions that might have cured her. But instead, the dark, cold humors of her body overwhelmed her sense, to a point that life to her became nothing but misery, an agony of grief from which death seemed the only escape. He turned to me. Learn from this, young Edward. This illness that took Allison's life is one that our kind may heal if we see the signs in time. I bowed, but said nothing. The Duke was still unsatisfied. All right, so the girl was mad, he said. You haven't given me a reason why, or a reason why both her suitors claimed she rejected them. Obviously, Lord Gabriel said, she rejected her suitors because she already held the idea of suicide in mind. She left the city that last night of her life, proposing to end it. As to what caused her illness, that's harder to say. She most likely had been born with her humors already out of balance, and her grief at the death of her father exaggerated the problem to the fatal degree. Now, I must go to the jail and free that poor young man. Well, if you won't be needing me, the Duke said, my wife is probably waiting for me, along with the stone-cold remains of my supper. He turned to me. Care to join me, young Edward? No, thank you, your grace, I said, mindful of my ongoing penance. But I think, if Lord Gabriel does not object, I will join him and go to see Dennis Cobbler set free. Suit yourself, the Duke said, and left the room. I think it's a very good idea you're coming with me, Lord Gabriel said. In fact, since you saved his wife's life, Dennis trusts you. You should be the one to tell him he's free to go. Before we left the castle, Lord Gabriel had to detour to get His Majesty's seal on an order to release Dennis. I waited meekly in a corridor. Then, escorted by 4 of the king's guards, we made our way to the prison. Lord Gabriel spoke to the jailer, who let us in without his usual wisecracks. The cobbler's son was being held in the same cell that Lee had been in. I suppose this was to keep the other inmates from murdering the mild-mannered boy for fun before he could be lawfully hanged. Gabriel waved me forward. Dennis, I called softly as the jailer let me into the cell. Dennis, it's me, Edward. I've come to set you free. I didn't kill, began a sleepy voice from a corner of the cell. Then Dennis scrambled to his feet. What? What did you say? I've come to set you free, I repeated. I had a vision, and Lord Gabriel, the king's wizard, had one too. We know you're innocent. Lord Gabriel spoke to the king, and His Majesty has ordered the jailer to release you. You're free to go home to your wife now. Dennis' enthusiasm at the news nearly knocked me over. Once I had extracted myself from the young man's embrace, I attempted to give him some advice. This prison is a filthy place, I said. Before you touch your wife or your son, you should bathe, lest you carry some sort of contagion. Wait, he interrupted. What happened, to Allison? Who murdered her? If it wasn't me, who was it? Malcolm? No one murdered her, I said. She, fell from the cliff. I was not happy with the thought of telling him his childhood friend had committed suicide. fell from the cliff. He gave me a look of disbelief. What do you mean, fell from the cliff? And what was she doing there to begin with? Perhaps Dennis was not as stupid as I'd thought. I sighed. Dennis, I said gently, she didn't exactly fall by accident. Dennis blinked. But you said no one murdered her. Allison took her own life, I said. She went to the cliffs alone and she threw herself off. We don't know why. We probably never will. Lord Gabriel, he says she must have been suffering from a brain sickness. I'm very sorry. It shouldn't have happened. She was a beautiful girl. Dennis turned away. His eyes were bright with tears. Something she had to do, he murmured. She said there was something she had to do? Lord Gabriel entered the cell, and Dennis threw himself at the old wizard. It was my fault, he cried, clutching at Gabriel's robe. It was all my fault. I might have saved her if I'd spared a moment to help her. The old man looked into Dennis's eyes, the expression on his lined face bearing all the sadness in the world. Oh dear, we can never know what might have been, he said. Do not blame yourself. This is not your doing. Go home, young man, to your wife and your child. But Allison, he protested. What of Allison? Tears still ran down his face. I had thought that a girl as good and loving as her would have gone on to a better life or even paradise, but now she took her own life. Where is she now? Old Gabriel took the boy into his arms as a father would a child. That is between Allison and Saint Morgana and our God, he said. Dennis stammered, you don't think she went... He couldn't even say it. Lord Gabriel shook his head. Allison was sick, not evil, he said. Let God take care of her. You need to take care of your wife and son. Isn't that right? Dennis nodded. Lord Gabriel led him from the cell. I followed them. What is your wife's name? Gabriel continued. Melly. Ah, yes, Melly. Lovely name. She's been very ill, hasn't she? Yes, said Dennis. Well, she's really going to need your help. Being ill and having a new baby and all, you need to go home to her right away. Master Edward said that I needed a bath. Oh, he did he? Said Gabriel. Then I think you should have one. He's a clever lad, Master Edward is. He saved Melly's life, Dennis said. Indeed, the wizard said. Well, then, you know the sort of fella he is. If you need anything, Dennis, anything at all, don't hesitate to call on him. Lord Gabriel sent 2 of the king's men with Dennis to be sure he got home safely. Then he turned to me. I'm more than a little concerned about this situation, he said. The terrible thing about cases such as poor Allison's is the madness seems to spread. One person dies, and then someone close to them begins to blame themselves for the death, and the cycle begins again. Do you think Dennis is likely to harm himself? I asked. Him? I don't think so, Lord Gabriel said. He has his family to think of still. One can never be sure. The unnameable one takes great pleasure in spreading suffering among God's children. And I am very concerned about that Malcolm fellow. He doesn't seem quite right to me. He may very well be in the grip of melancholy already. You're close to the elf in that household, aren't you? Yes, my lord. Then I want you to keep both eyes and one ear on everyone associated with this poor girl's death, and let me know if you feel they may need help. This madness can be cured if caught in time. St. Tanis prevent we find any more creatures floating in the bay. I nodded and took my leave of the old wizard. The sun had set, and I began to make my way through lamplit streets. back down to the snake and egg. I had freed an innocent man and solved the puzzle of Allison's death. So why, I wondered, did I feel worse than ever? The next chapter is called Something Fishy.